And because we are born into a racist society, all of us have this, by the way, me too. You know, we all have it because our country has this history of white supremacy and racism and imperialism. So if we want to decode that, dismantle it, decolonize it, we have to name it and shame it and actually work out what these institutions are, how they work. Unconscious bias is part of institutionalized patterns of discrimination. We have to look at the institutions, try to dismantle them a bit and actually move on from it because we're tackling the problem directly and naming it honestly and having an honest discussion about it. This applies obviously across all discriminations. But I wanted to sort of really finish my remarks by saying this, my own experience, I suppose. I'm very confident that the future of Scotland will be a very non-racial and anti-racist country because we are grappling with rejecting an imperialist British viewpoint of what a nation is and what it can be. We're rejecting an ethnocentric definition of what that nation is. We're setting an example of civic nationalism and inclusion, which means that we have a national identity which is going to be different. It's not going to be what it is now.
You paint a pretty bleak picture when you say any Scottish city is decades behind cities like Manchester or Bristol in terms of attitudes to race.
Somebody's quoted me out of context. I didn't actually say that. I said that any Scottish city was decades behind any English city in terms of how the mirror it held up to itself. So in Birmingham, for instance, having a black Brummie is not unusual, and a Birmingham person would think that. In London, the same. In Liverpool, the same. But in Scotland, in any Scottish city, although we've got a large, diverse population here, if you say Glaswegian, the image that comes to your head isn't necessarily of a black Glaswegian. And so for people to catch up and realise that there are a lot of black people living in Scotland, that we do have a diverse population here, but we need to see that population reflected in the media, in all sorts of different ways.
And relies on migration for growing its population, more so than anywhere else in the UK. In fact, it's a fact, here we go, all of Scotland's population growth over the next 25 years is projected to come from migration. And every time they repeat this so-called fact as if it's gospel truth, I'm still left wondering just how any of these projections can come to light when we don't have control over immigration currently. Rather convenient projections, if you ask me. But even if they are projections showcasing all of our growth to come from one specific area, that doesn't mean it's set in stone, unless of course they ain't projections and in fact they're targets. Of course they're fucking targets. Of course they're targets. Immigration policies do not take into account our unique circumstances. What is unique about doing nothing? Who do people think you fucking are, like? Seriously? Where do you get off? Unique circumstances. What, because you did nothing? None of you have done anything for all the time you've been in power. 20 odd years the Scottish Parliament has existed. And yet, here we are, 20 years on from that fact, and nothing's been done. And in those 20 years, these problems, these trends have continued to worsen. And all they've got to say for themselves is that it's unique circumstances. Unique circumstances. And what they plan to do to rectify these issues. Still no mention of native birth incentives, still no mention of family creation, etc. Packages to support marriages. Oh no. Still focusing on migration. Of course we are. With independence and full power over migration, we can build not just an immigration system, but an asylum one too. Here we go. Based on fairness and human rights. Okay. In the meantime, the SNP will continue to seek the devolution of migration powers so that we can have a migration policy that will help to grow the population. What happens over time if the trends on display continue? Scots will go from being the majority of people in this country to a minority within a matter of decades to a thing of the past within about 100 years if this was to go ahead without a hitch. That's shameful. I think that's scandalous, in fact. Bordering on fucking evil. I believe there should be an additional route for migration to Scotland, alongside UK routes, by means of a Scottish visa. This could operate within a UK framework, but the requirements should be set by the government, accountable to the Parliament, and be designed to reflect and address the economic and demographic circumstances. only are we going to be outbred, the more and more legislative proposals and law changes, etc., that are implemented in the future, we're effectively going to be ousted from our own country, on paper anyway, when it comes to the prioritisation, the intersectionality and quotas, etc. You get my drift. And now they're wanting to bring down the cost and reduce the complexity of citizenship. So they're just making it as cheap as chips and make it so any old Tom, Dick and Harry can rock up here and by the end of the weekend be Scottish. All that they can to ensure that there is no native Scottish population. Creation of safe and legal routes for people to find protection in the UK. We're going to promote and create safe and legal routes for people to get here. People also call on the government to follow the UNHCR's recommendations and commit to take 10,000 per year under the Syrian Vulnerable Person Resettlement Programme, and to further commit to long-term refugee resettlement beyond 2021. Record low birth rates. All the education to promote the evils of our ancestors and promote your social engineering programs to ensure that the record low birth rates stay just as they are. Favourite. I'm just so happy in it. Proposal. MPs will push for the reform of detention and asylum systems for the LGBTs and the T individuals escaping countries where homosexuality is criminalised. And they're going to remove any unfair and invasive demands for proof of sexuality or gender identity. Well, that's all the Kenyans need to fucking hear. The Sustainable Development Goals are a blueprint for building a better future for all, apparently. A blueprint for building a better future. Yes, unless you're a native Scot, because they don't exist in this world, do they? This is gallivanting around the country currently in that bus that says Stop Brexit on the side of it. And every time it parks up and she emerges, she's met with a bunch of people waiting for her to open that thin lip gob, waving saltires. Not really. How many people genuinely think that she and the rest of them give a shit about you, or I, or our past? Certainly not our future anyway. Westminster, Stuart Big Boy MacDonald, the party's immigration spokesperson, has worked across party lines and with organisations including the 3 Million campaign supporting EU nationals already living in the UK, etc., and to prevent the Tories from creating another Windrush scandal. Scotland is enfranchising EU citizens. The UK still refuses to do so, and rightfully so. You could argue that the EU citizens played a role in the referendum of 2014 going the way that it did. Why should they have the right to vote in our elections? They have no loyalty to this country. Still significant work to be done to achieve gender balance in our parliaments. In Scotland, including giving the Scottish Parliament the option of adopting candidate quotas, of course.
Be impacted after Brexit as an immigrant living in Scotland?
Well, firstly, thank you for being an immigrant living in Scotland. I think everybody who chooses to come to Scotland to make a contribution to our country does us a huge honour, and I think we should be hugely grateful to you for that. I hope Brexit doesn't impact on you, because I want people who've chosen to make Scotland their home to be able to stay and continue to make a contribution. But I do fear the impact of Brexit on the reputation of the UK as a welcoming place. We also know the UK government wants to reduce immigration, which has big implications for Scotland.
Because you've done nothing, nor had your predecessor. So it highlights and puts full focus directly on your negligence. The blame lies solely with you. I love how they're scapegoating Brexit, or the hypothetical Brexit scenario now, as to why there's a concern in relation to population. What have you done up until this point? What had your predecessor done up until this point? All the years that you've been in charge, all the years that you've been pandering relentlessly to migrants, all the years that Alex Salmond was in charge, all the years that Scotland's had its own parliament, and yet you've been staring at these projections, you've allowed them to worsen, and instead of looking into the problem, reversing the trends, doing anything. Oh no. You continue on with feminising little boys, promoting pornography, empowering girls, removing stereotypes, and just relying on migration. And any government relies on migrants to fill shortages in the workforce will then have to rely on more migrants to fill shortages when those migrants grow old. While this is all occurring, the native Scottish population disappears into nothingness because the policies implemented by this thin-lipped fucker and her predecessor, and of course all the other little lefty parties across the European Union, they're all doing the same thing, and they all seem to celebrate the prospect of their countries becoming less and less and less German or Scottish or whatever it may be.
Own population over the next 25 years is not growing as fast as we would want it to.
And what are you doing about it? What are they doing about it? Not a damn thing.
All of the growth in our population is projected to come from immigration.
And that's just such BS.
We really need people to come and work in Scotland.
Oh, we need people because we can't do anything ourselves. We're not even going to pretend. Why bother?
In order to make sure that we've got a working age population that is rising. So I will do everything I can to make sure Scotland is and is seen to be a welcoming place for people who want to come and live there. And my message to people in Europe and across the world is Scotland's open for business. Please think about coming and living in Scotland and making a contribution. You're very welcome.
Please get me. But me.
So we've done a great deal of work in thinking about how we do that while continuing to grow public spending.
So Brussels has no control, or what?
Look, we would be in charge of making sure that our economy was sustainable and our deficit was sustainable.
But why give up any of your independence to Brussels?
Well, because being in the European Union has benefits. It has benefits in terms of free movement.
Oh, what a benefit. What a fucking benefit. Why didn't I think of that? Oh, she got you there, Jeremy. What a doozy. Wow. What a doozy. Wow. So progressive.